race. You can see here an awful crash just before.
Beneath the brilliance of gold medals and roaring crowds, the Olympic Games carry stories far darker than victory. Across decades, moments meant for glory have turned into scenes of heartbreak, crashes at impossible speeds, lives lost before dreams could unfold, celebrations shattered in seconds. These are the most horrifying tragedies in Olympic history when the pursuit of greatness came at the ultimate cost. Bahman Golbarad, September 17, 2016. The sun burned over the winding roads of Pontal, Rio de Janeiro, turning the asphalt into a ribbon of heat. The men's C4-5 Paralympic road race was underway, a grueling test of endurance filled with sharp descents and punishing turns. Among the riders was 48-year-old Bahman Golbarad, Iran's only cyclist at the Games. He was not simply racing for a medal, he was carrying a lifetime of survival on his shoulders. Decades earlier, during the Iran-Iraq War, a landmine had taken his left leg. For many, that moment would have marked the end of ambition. For Bahman, it became the beginning of reinvention. 3 years after the explosion, he stepped into competitive sport. First wrestling, then powerlifting, where he claimed 12 international gold medals and a silver. When a severe shoulder injury forced him to leave weightlifting behind, he refused to surrender. In 2006, at nearly 40 years old, he turned to cycling, once again rebuilding himself from the ground up. By 2012, he qualified for the London Paralympics. In 2016, he arrived in Rio as Iran's sole representative in cycling, carrying not only national pride but also personal grief, having lost his first wife to cancer in 2012 while raising their son alone. The Pontal course offered no mercy. Steep downhill stretches demanded flawless control. One mistake could mean catastrophe. As Bahman approached one of the most dangerous descents, witnesses said he appeared steady and focused. Then, in a fraction of a second, control slipped away. His bike veered. The crash was violent. He lost control on the descent and collided with a rock, the impact resonating along the course as medics quickly rushed to his side. Medics rushed to his side, working desperately under the blazing sun before placing him into an ambulance, but the injuries were catastrophic. On the way to the hospital, Bahman suffered cardiac arrest. Despite every effort to save him, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. He became the first athlete in Paralympic history to die during competition. Shock swept through the Paralympic village. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Moments of silence were observed. Iran's sitting volleyball team would later dedicate their gold medal victory to him, saying his spirit was with them on the podium. Tributes poured in from across the world. Sir Philip Craven, president of the International Paralympic Committee, called the news truly heartbreaking. Yet Bahman Golbarad's story cannot be reduced to the tragedy of a single descent. He was a man who had already survived war, rebuilt his body, reshaped his destiny, and refused to let loss define him. A soldier, a father, a champion who kept pushing forward no matter how steep the road became. And on that sun-scorched Brazilian afternoon, sport proved as unforgiving as any battlefield. If stories like Bahman's move you, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover the powerful, untold moments behind the world's greatest sporting stage. Ulrike Maier, January 29, 1994. A gray winter afternoon settled over Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. The Kandahar downhill course, fast, narrow, and notoriously unforgiving, was hosting one of the final World Cup races before the Lillehammer Olympics. Among the world's elite stood 26-year-old Ulrike Maier, Austria's golden star. She was already a legend. Two-time world champion. 5 World Cup victories. Elegant, fearless, precise. Yet that season carried a different meaning. Maier had been speaking quietly about retirement. She wanted time, real time, with her 4-year-old daughter Melanie. After years of crashes, travel, and relentless competition, she was ready to step away. At 1:58 p.m., wearing bib number 32, she pushed out of the start gate. The run was clean, controlled, confident. Spectators watched as she carved down the mountain at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. Then, just seconds from the finish line, something shifted. Her right ski caught an inside edge in soft snow. Balance disappeared in an instant. She fell at tremendous speed and slid off course. Medical teams responded immediately. She was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic. Later that day, doctors confirmed she had suffered severe trauma to her neck and spine. She did not survive. The news stunned the skiing world. Millions had witnessed the accident live. Austria mourned not only a champion, but a young mother whose life had seemed so full of promise beyond the slopes. In the aftermath, questions surfaced. Early reports suggested she had struck a wooden timing post, sparking legal action and public outrage. Investigations later concluded that the snow conditions and speed were the primary factors. Courts ultimately dismissed negligence claims, but the debate left a lasting mark on the sport. Her death led to meaningful safety reforms, stronger protective netting, improved course markings, redesigned helmets, and stricter safety protocols. The sport was forced to confront its risks more directly than ever before. Ulrike Maier remains the only female alpine skier to die in a World Cup race. Her legacy lives on, not only in medals and titles, but in the safety changes that protect athletes today. She chased the mountain with courage and grace. And on that cold January afternoon, the line between mastery and mortality proved heartbreakingly thin. Sergey Chalibashvili. July 1983, Edmonton, Canada. Inside the University Aquatic Center, the water lay perfectly still beneath the glare of competition lights. The Summer Universiade had drawn some of the world's most promising young athletes, and among them stood 21-year-old Sergey Chalibashvili of Soviet Georgia. Already a silver medalist at the European Youth Championships and a standout in Soviet national competitions, Sergey was known for his fearlessness and technical precision. But talent alone was never enough for him. He wanted to push further to attempt what others hesitated to try and prove he belonged on the world stage. That day, he prepared for one of the most difficult dives in international competition, a reverse 3.5 somersault in the tuck position from the 10-meter platform. It was a recently approved maneuver, breathtaking in its complexity and unforgiving in its margin for error. As he stepped to the edge of the platform, the arena quieted. He launched powerfully into the air, rotating with speed and commitment. But during the second somersault, his alignment shifted slightly, just inches off. Instead of clearing the platform cleanly, he struck the back of his head against its edge before falling into the pool below. The reaction was immediate. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Fellow competitors and spectators instantly understood that this was no ordinary fall. Medics rushed to the deck and pulled him from the water unresponsive. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he remained in a coma for nearly a week. Machines sustained him as teammates and coaches waited for any sign of recovery. None came. On July 16, 1983, Sergey Chalibashvili passed away from severe cranial and cerebral injuries caused by the impact. In the days that followed, questions circulated quietly whether he had been warned about the risks, whether the dive had been worth the danger. What remained undeniable was his determination. The same drive that had lifted him toward international recognition had also carried him into a moment where precision failed by a fraction. Sergey is remembered as the only known water sports athlete to die as a direct result of a competition accident at a major international multi-sport event. His story endures as a solemn reminder of how exacting elite sport can be, where excellence is measured in inches and sometimes tragically so is survival. Francisco Lazaro. July 14, 1912, Stockholm, Sweden. The summer sun hung mercilessly over the city as marathon runners gathered at the starting line of the Olympic Games. Among them stood 24-year-old Francisco Lazaro, a Portuguese carpenter national champion and the proud flag bearer for Portugal's first appearance in the modern Olympics. He carried more than ambition that day. He carried history. Lazaro was known for his fierce determination, a competitor who believed willpower could overcome any obstacle. Before the race, he reportedly declared, "Either I win or I die." To him, it was a statement of courage. To history, it would become something far darker. In preparation for the intense heat, Lazaro covered much of his body in wax, believing it would protect him from sunburn and possibly improve his performance. But the decision would prove fatal. As temperatures climbed and the miles stretched on, the wax blocked his pores, preventing his body from cooling itself properly. Spectators saw a young athlete pushing through visible fatigue. What they could not see was the rising internal temperature slowly overwhelming him. Around the 30-kilometer mark, he collapsed. Doctors rushed to his aid and worked through the night, but his body temperature had reached a catastrophic 41 degrees Celsius, 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit. In the early hours of July 15th, Francisco Lazaro died, becoming the first athlete in modern Olympic history to lose his life during competition. The shock reverberated far beyond Stockholm. A memorial service at the Olympic Stadium drew more than 23,000 mourners. Back in Portugal, thousands attended his funeral, honoring the young man who had carried their flag with pride. A monument was later erected near the marathon's turning point, marking the place where determination met its tragic limit. Francisco Lazaro's story remains one of ambition, sacrifice, and unintended consequence. He set out to prove that courage could conquer all. Instead, his death became a sobering reminder that even at the pinnacle of human endurance, the body has limits, and the line between triumph and tragedy can be heartbreakingly thin. If you think his decision to coat his body in wax was a bold risk in pursuit of victory or a tragic mistake that cost him everything, comment 1 below. Knud Enemark Jensen. August 26, 1960. Rome was sweltering under a relentless summer sun as cyclists lined up for the 100-kilometer team time trial at the Olympic Games. Temperatures soared past 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and the asphalt radiated heat back into the riders' legs. Among the Danish team was 23-year-old Knud Enemark Jensen, a strong, disciplined cyclist who had already earned podium finishes at the Nordic Championships and carried the expectations of a proud nation. The race quickly turned brutal. One Danish teammate was forced to abandon due to sunstroke, placing enormous pressure on the remaining riders. In team time trials, if too many cyclists fail to finish, the entire team is disqualified. Jensen understood what was at stake. He pressed forward even as dizziness began to blur his vision. Teammates later tried to support him, pouring water over his head and urging him to stay focused in the suffocating heat, but the strain was overwhelming. As the kilometers dragged on, Jensen suddenly lost balance and collapsed onto the pavement. He struck his head in the fall and was rushed to a nearby medical tent where conditions were scarcely cooler than the road itself. Despite urgent medical attention, he never regained consciousness. Later that day, Knud Enemark Jensen was pronounced dead. The official cause cited heat stroke compounded by a skull fracture from the fall. Yet the tragedy did not end there. In the days that followed, revelations emerged that members of the Danish team had been given performance-enhancing substances before the race. While reports varied and some claims were contested, the possibility that stimulants played a role cast a long shadow over the sport. Jensen's death became a watershed moment. It forced the Olympic movement to confront the growing issue of doping, ultimately leading to the introduction of formal drug testing at the 1968 Winter Games and the Summer Olympics in Mexico City. His loss reshaped policy awareness and athlete safety for generations to come. Knud Enemark Jensen set out that day to help his team chase Olympic glory. Instead, his name became permanently linked to one of the game's most sobering turning points, a reminder that ambition, when combined with extreme conditions and unchecked pressure, can carry consequences far beyond the finish line. Nicolas Bochatay. The 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France were designed to celebrate spectacle, and few events captured that spirit like speed skiing. It wasn't about elegance or technical artistry. It was about velocity. Pure, overwhelming velocity. Athletes rocketed down near vertical slopes in aerodynamic suits, reaching speeds that pushed past 150 miles per hour. It was thrilling. It was futuristic. It was dangerously close to the edge. For 27-year-old Swiss skier Nicolas Bochatay, it was everything he had worked toward. He had earned his place among the elite, qualifying for the finals of the demonstration event. Friends described him as focused, disciplined, and fearless, the kind of athlete who understood the risks but embraced them anyway. On February 22, 1992, just hours before the most important race of his life, Bochatay joined several fellow competitors for a warm-up run on a nearby public slope. It was supposed to be routine. One last glide before the spotlight. Bochatay led the group down the mountain. As he crested a small rise at high speed, what lay beyond was something no skier expects to see mid-run: a snow grooming machine positioned directly in his path. There was no time to turn, no time to brake. In a split-second, momentum became fate. The collision was fatal. Despite the shocking nature of the accident, the thousands of spectators waiting for the speed skiing finals were never formally informed during the event. Competition continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Quietly, tragically, something had changed. Questions followed in the days and years after. Why was heavy machinery present on an active slope? Were there adequate warnings? Some reports noted that Bochatay had been skiing on slalom skis rather than his specialized speed skis, adding another layer of uncertainty to the circumstances. To this day, the full picture remains clouded by conflicting accounts. What is clear is the impact his death had on the sport. Speed skiing, already viewed as extreme, never became an official Olympic medal event. The risks were simply too great. Nicholas Bochatay set out that morning for a final warm-up, one last descent before chasing Olympic glory. Instead, it became his final run. A stark reminder that in a discipline built on breathtaking speed, the margin for error can vanish in an instant. Ross Milne. At just 19 years old, Ross Milne arrived at the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria, carrying the hopes of a nation unaccustomed to winter glory. Australia was known for beaches and blazing sun, not alpine slopes and icy descents. But Milne had trained relentlessly, determined to prove that talent and discipline could overcome geography. He wasn't there as a novelty, he was there to compete. The games themselves were already troubled. A severe lack of natural snowfall had forced organizers to transport snow from other regions, creating inconsistent and unstable racing surfaces. The downhill course was particularly concerning. Safety barriers were limited. Tree trunks stood dangerously close to the racing line. Rough patches and uneven terrain made control more difficult at high speeds. Journalists and athletes had raised warnings about the hazardous conditions, but few meaningful changes were made before competition began. On January 25th, during a downhill practice run, Milne pushed out of the start gate with focus and precision. Downhill skiing demanded absolute commitment speeds reaching 60 to 70 kilometers per hour with no margin for hesitation. He navigated the upper sections smoothly. Then, in a moment no athlete could anticipate, people were reportedly standing on or near the course, an astonishing breach of safety in such a high-speed event. In a split-second decision to avoid a collision, Milne swerved sharply. The sudden movement caused him to lose control, and he was thrown off the racing line, crashing violently into a tree. The impact left him unconscious instantly. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but the injuries were devastating. Despite urgent medical efforts, Ross Milne did not survive. His death became the second fatality of the 1964 Winter Olympics, casting a heavy shadow over the Games. In the aftermath, some officials suggested that inexperience may have contributed to the crash, subtly pointing to Australia's limited winter sports tradition. Those who knew Milne strongly rejected that claim. He had prepared as rigorously as any European competitor. The issue was not his readiness, but the dangerous conditions surrounding him. Ross Milne traveled to Innsbruck to make history for his country. Instead, he became part of a far more tragic chapter, a reminder that in events defined by speed and precision, safety must never be secondary. Nodar Kumaritashvili. The 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver were meant to open with celebration flags, waving fireworks, rising, the world watching. But before the flame was even lit, tragedy struck. The Whistler Sliding Center had already earned a reputation. Athletes whispered about its speed. Engineers had recorded velocities that pushed the limits of what many considered safe. Complaints had surfaced months earlier, warning that certain sections of the track were dangerously fast, especially for luge, a sport where competitors lie flat on their backs, feet first hurtling down ice at highway speeds with nothing but a helmet and thin fiberglass shell between them and disaster. On February 12, 2010, 21-year-old Nodar Kumaritashvili of Georgia stepped onto his sled for a final training run before the opening ceremony. He came from a family of lugers. This was not a reckless rookie chasing a dream. This was a young man raised in the sport, trained for this moment, determined to represent his country on the Olympic stage. As he launched from the start, he accelerated rapidly down the icy track. Curve after curve, he maintained control. Teammates watched from below. His family followed anxiously. Then, approaching one of the final turns, something shifted. His sled drifted slightly off its ideal line. At speeds nearing 90 miles per hour, even the smallest miscalculation can become irreversible. His sled made contact with the wall near the final turn, and he went beyond the track boundary, coming into contact with a steel support structure just outside the barriers. Emergency crews responded immediately, performing CPR at trackside before transporting him to a nearby hospital. The injuries were catastrophic. Nodar Kumaritashvili was pronounced dead shortly after. The shock rippled through the Olympic Village. During the opening ceremony that evening, the Georgian team marched in silence, black armbands wrapped around their sleeves. The celebration felt subdued, the weight of loss impossible to ignore. In the aftermath, officials described the crash as athlete error, but critics pointed back to earlier warnings about the track's extreme speeds and design. Modifications were quickly made before competition resumed, walls were raised, the start position was lowered to reduce speed changes that many felt should have happened sooner. Nodar Kumaritashvili came to Vancouver chasing a lifelong dream. Instead, he became a solemn reminder of how unforgiving Olympic sport can be when speed outpaces safety. His name is now forever linked to those games, not for a medal won, but for a life lost before the opening ceremony even began. Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski. The 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria are remembered not only for competition but for loss. Among the athletes was 55-year-old Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski, a Polish-born competitor representing Great Britain in luge. He was the oldest athlete in the event, affectionately nicknamed Uncle by fellow Olympians. But behind the warm nickname was a man of discipline and determination. A former Royal Air Force pilot, Kay-Skrzypeski was no stranger to speed or risk. He maintained exceptional physical condition and refused to let age define his limits. The Olympic Games to him were not a farewell tour, they were proof that experience and resolve could stand beside youth. Yet the luge track in Innsbruck presented serious challenges. Sections of the ice were inconsistent. Some areas were reportedly waterlogged, creating unpredictable conditions for athletes already navigating high speeds and tight curves. Crashes during training were not uncommon, and concerns about safety quietly circulated. During a practice run, Kay-Skrzypeski lost control of his sled on one of the course's demanding sections. He left the track and sustained severe injuries. He was transported to a hospital and underwent emergency surgery, but despite medical efforts, he passed away the following day, just days before the Games officially began. His death sent shockwaves through the Olympic community. Some speculated about age being a factor, but those who knew him dismissed that suggestion. He had trained rigorously and brought the discipline of a military pilot to his preparation. Many athletes believed the greater issue lay with the track itself and the difficult conditions competitors faced. Still, competition continued. Kazimierz Kay-Skrzypeski had come to Innsbruck to challenge himself to stand among the world's best, regardless of age. Instead, he became part of one of the darkest chapters of the 1964 Winter Games, a reminder that courage does not diminish with time, and that in the pursuit of Olympic dreams, even the most seasoned competitors can face unforeseen danger. If you believe Kay-Skrzypeski's crash was the result of dangerous track conditions rather than his age, comment 2 below. Alice Hawthorne. July 27, 1996. Centennial Olympic Park pulsed with music, laughter, and the electric energy of the Summer Games. Thousands of visitors filled the 21-acre park, gathering for a free concert under the warm Atlanta sky. It was meant to be a celebration of unity, strangers from around the world standing shoulder to shoulder, sharing in the Olympic spirit. Among them was 44-year-old Alice Hawthorne of Albany, Georgia. She had saved for months to bring her 14-year-old daughter to the Olympics, believing this trip would be a memory they would treasure forever. That night, they stood together in the crowd, illuminated by stage lights, surrounded by joy. Shortly after 1:20 a.m., the atmosphere shifted in an instant. A security guard had discovered a suspicious backpack near a sound tower and began urging people away from the area. Moments later, a pipe bomb detonated. The explosion tore through the park, sending shrapnel into the crowd and replacing music with screams. Confusion spread as people ran unsure of what had happened or where the danger lay. What had felt like the safest gathering place in Olympic Atlanta became a scene of chaos within seconds. Alice Hawthorne was struck by fragments from the blast. Emergency responders rushed to the wounded as sirens filled the night. More than 100 people were injured in the explosion and the panic that followed. Despite rapid medical attention, Alice did not survive. She became the only direct fatality of the Centennial Olympic Park bombing, a mother who had come simply to celebrate the games with her child. The Olympics continued, but they were forever changed. Security measures tightened immediately across all venues, ushering in a new era of heightened protection that still defines the modern games. Alice's death shattered the belief that the Olympics existed apart from the world's violence. She was not an athlete chasing gold, but her story became part of Olympic history, a reminder that even in moments designed for unity and celebration, tragedy can arrive without warning. Moshe Weinberg. September 5th, 1972. In the quiet, early hours of the morning, the Munich Olympic Village was meant to symbolize peace, a modern Germany welcoming the world to what had been called the Happy Olympics. But before sunrise, armed members of the Palestinian militant group Black September scaled the perimeter fence and forced their way into the Israeli team's quarters, shattering the illusion of safety that surrounded the games. Inside one of those apartments was Moshe Weinberg, 33 years old, head coach of Israel's Olympic wrestling team. A former competitive wrestler, Weinberg was known for his strength discipline and deep loyalty to his athletes. He was more than a coach. He was a guardian figure responsible for guiding his team on the world's biggest sporting stage. When the gunmen stormed the room, Weinberg did not stand by helplessly. He resisted. Despite being outnumbered and armed only with his resolve, he fought back, attempting to protect his athletes and disrupt the attackers' control. During the struggle, Weinberg was shot. Even after being wounded, he reportedly tried to mislead the gunmen, directing them toward a different apartment in hopes of giving others a chance to escape. His actions allowed at least one teammate to flee the building, but the attackers regained control and Weinberg was shot again. He died inside the Olympic Village, becoming the first victim of what would escalate into one of the darkest tragedies in Olympic history. Over the next several hours, the hostage crisis would claim the lives of 11 Israeli athletes and coaches. The games were paused briefly, then resumed, but nothing about Munich 1972 would ever feel the same. Moshe Weinberg had come to the Olympics to lead, to teach, and to compete in the spirit of sport. Instead, he is remembered for his courage in the face of terror, a man who chose to stand between violence and his team when it mattered most. Moshe Weinberg. September 5th, 1972. In the quiet, early hours of the morning, the Munich Olympic Village was meant to symbolize peace, a modern Germany welcoming the world to what had been called the Happy Olympics. But before sunrise, armed members of the Palestinian militant group Black September scaled the perimeter fence and forced their way into the Israeli team's quarters, shattering the illusion of safety that surrounded the games. Inside one of those apartments was Moshe Weinberg, 33 years old, head coach of Israel's Olympic wrestling team. A former competitive wrestler, Weinberg was known for his strength discipline and deep loyalty to his athletes. He was more than a coach. He was a guardian figure responsible for guiding his team on the world's biggest sporting stage. When the gunmen stormed the room, Weinberg did not stand by helplessly. He resisted. Despite being outnumbered and armed only with his resolve, he fought back, attempting to protect his athletes and disrupt the attackers' control. During the struggle, Weinberg was shot. Even after being wounded, he reportedly tried to mislead the gunmen, directing them toward a different apartment in hopes of giving others a chance to escape. His actions allowed at least one teammate to flee the building, but the attackers regained control and Weinberg was shot again. He died inside the Olympic Village, becoming the first victim of what would escalate into one of the darkest tragedies in Olympic history. Over the next several hours, the hostage crisis would claim the lives of 11 Israeli athletes and coaches. The games were paused briefly, then resumed, but nothing about Munich 1972 would ever feel the same. Moshe Weinberg had come to the Olympics to lead, to teach, and to compete in the spirit of sport. Instead, he is remembered for his courage in the face of terror, a man who chose to stand between violence and his team when it mattered most.